It's not doing the auto changeover. It's supposed to do the auto changeover. I don't know what's going on. It's pissing me off. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. Tonight, on this fine Saturday evening, why not do a vegan debate? Half the fun in life, right? Having the carnivores and the vegetarians smacking around each other right here on the Crucible. A lot of fun to watch, a lot of fun to see. They're in the background. They're kind of laughing right now. So it's no laughing. It's very serious. It's very serious. No laughing matter. Right? It's kind of funny. But anyway, make sure that you like, share, subscribe, do all that shit you're supposed to do that boosts us up in the algorithm. And also make sure that you listen to Hypnotoad. Do as the Hypno Frog commands. Now, there's going to be a full session debate. We will be taking callers tonight. We'll be taking super chats. Make sure you get those in if you have questions for the debaters or you want to support them. Also, if you're a channel member, make sure that you pick up a channel membership. You can, during the debate, throw cans of soup, full cans of soup, because we're not just going to do the tomato. You get to throw the whole can at the debater you hate the most for my own personal amusement. Just love watching that. We'll be right back with our debaters. And we're back. Thank you so much for coming on this fine evening. Even though I know that I'm a heartless, merciless, meat-eating monster, I do appreciate when vegans come on this program and do their debates. I do enjoy it very much. You will get a fair debate here, regardless of where you stand. Jeffrey, why don't you take a second, introduce yourself, tell us all a little bit about yourself very briefly, and then where everybody can find you.
My name is Jeffrey Phillips. My YouTube is YouTube at Jeffrey Phillips. I am 45 years old. I live in Southern California. And usually almost every day of the week, you could find me on the Paul and Slave Show.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. And then Mr. Farms. Let's just go with that name. Why don't you tell us all a little bit about yourself very briefly and where everybody can find you?
Okay. My name is J.D. Garland. My channel is Garland Farms. I am a farmer, former nationally certified strength and conditioning specialist. I have a degree in kinesiology with a minor in biology. I raise regeneratively rotated grazing ruminants, goats, and cattle. And I'm here in Central Texas.
All right. Appreciate that very much. By the way, for those of you who are just now getting into the debate and you're wondering what it's about, read the title. Read the title. Why can't you people read? Read the title, and then you'll know what the debate's about. Anyway, okay, so that's just talking to the audience a little bit. All right, I'm cool down. Okay, even though they don't know how to fucking read, it's okay. All right, guys, we're gonna launch right into our 7-minute opening statements. Now, Jeffrey, were you the challenger or was Mr. Farms the challenger?
I'm not quite sure because someone, there was several middle people between making it happen. It started, I was on the Paul and Slave show, and someone on the show brought up the idea that the plant-based diet kills more animals than animal-based diet, and I challenged him to a debate, but he wasn't really willing to debate. And he said he's not a debater, and I was like, well, I'm not either, but then it went to it ended up a few days later, I was getting tagged on YouTube that me and Garland had a debate, and I didn't even hear about it, but it looked great. It looked cool, so I was down to do it.
All right. Well, do you mind opening first?
Sure. Yeah, I can open first.
We'll let you open first, and then that'll allow you.
This is Allie too. She's on YouTube also at Allie Phillips.
Allie
Okay.
Phillips, yeah, YouTube or at ALIFOOSH.
Okay, but we're all bigoted, and women are only props on the Crucible. I need you to understand that's very important. I'm joking. I already see you're offended.
I'm taking a break from the kitchen for this day. No.
Yes. Yes.
No.
And obviously you have the husband's permission, right? So it's all good. Right? Anyway, you got the first 7-minute opening. Go ahead.
All right. The structure of the food production industry today is a result of many factors. The plant agriculture and animal agriculture industries have become intertwined as a result of increased efficiency for greater profits. And as a result, the government's subsidies dictating production. Today, we're going to explore that while the mass food production industry as a whole currently causes environmental harm to varying degrees, the animal product industry is the leader in harm done to the environment. The degree of this harm can be measured by examining the levels of air, water, and land pollution emitted by the production of meat and dairy compared to plant foods.
Globally, animal foods are the leading polluters of ecosystems via runoff of excess nutrients into the surrounding environment and waterways. Measured in grams of phosphate equivalents per calorie and per kilogram, animal foods exceed the majority of plant foods and far exceed all staple plant foods in their eutrophying emissions. In the United States, farm animals are the greatest contributor of gaseous ammonia emissions. 80% of the 15,900 annual human deaths directly resulting from food-related air pollution are attributed to animal-based foods. Looking at soy, only 20% of its global use is directly for human food. Over 30% is fed to chickens and other poultry, 20% to pigs, 6% for aquaculture, and 2% for beef and dairy production. Looking at corn production in the U.S., the majority is fed to animals. For corn-fed animals, the efficiency of converting grain to meat and dairy calories ranges from 3 to 40%. So at best, that's a 60% loss in calories to the animal's excretions, basically. All while animal products make up 27% of total calories consumed by Americans. Looking at crop deaths from plant agriculture, it's estimated that there are 7.3 billion animal deaths per year, which include mouse deaths, birds killed by pesticides, fish killed by fertilizer runoff, and lizards and amphibians killed by eating pesticide-contaminated insects. This compared to the 9.5 billion land animals directly killed for food in the U.S. each year. When you add marine animals, that number becomes 55 billion animals directly killed for human consumption versus the 7.3 billion animal number for the casualties from plant agriculture. And with that, I yield.
Okay. Appreciate the opening statement. Felt like a teacher where you're like, okay, now who wants to read the next paragraph? All right. All right. Mr. Farms, you're up. You have 7 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, it's ironic to be debating vegans on whether animal agriculture or crop agriculture is more harmful. The whole premise of being a vegan is to do the least amount of harm possible. And you can see that vegans do not really like to focus on the animal deaths that are associated with the crop agriculture that brings the vegan menu to the market. When you talk about crop agriculture, you're talking about oranges, apples, pears, cucumbers, avocados, celery, spinach, green beans, peas. The list just goes on and on and on. Livestock do not eat any of those. However, the two crops that are associated with animal feed are corn and soybean. When you look at soybean, for instance, it is certainly, they listed a lot of the destruction and harm that soybean crops are responsible for, including the destructive tillage, the pesticides, the synthetic nitrogen, the mined phosphorus, the mined potassium. These are all very destructive practices, as well as all of the runoff, the fertilizer runoff, the pesticide runoff. All of the animals, animals are actually being driven into extinction by crop agriculture, primarily the corn and soybean industries. You did hear how like 20% of, only 20% of the soybean crop is going to humans. It's actually more than 20%. It's about 27%, because about 7% of the soybeans are grown specifically for human consumption. It goes directly to the humans as whole soybeans. But anyone that invests in commodities futures has heard of the soybean crush spread. And this is a investment strategy that investors use to hedge their bets on soybean investments. And it's based on the fact that every year, about 90% of the world's soybeans are processed. They're crushed to squeeze out the oil. Soybeans are an oil seed. In fact, they provide 61% of the world's seed oils. And so 90% of the world's soybeans are actually processed to extract the oil. And humans consume 100% of that oil, either as cooking oil, as an ingredient in ultra-processed junk food, or as biofuel, biodiesel. So when they say 20% of the soybeans are going to human consumption, this is how intellectually dishonest that statement actually is. It's kind of like this. When you peel a pecan and you remove the meat of the pecan and put it on one side and you put the shell on the other and you weigh the two, the shell is going to weigh about 60% of the total pecan, and the pecan nut meat is going to weigh about 40% of the total pecan. Now, if you feed that nut meat to people and you grind up the shell of the pecan and feed it to animals, then you turn around and claim that only 40% of the pecans are going to feed humans. Do you see how that's not actually honest? You're not actually feeding 40% of the pecans to the humans, because you've processed the pecan. You've removed the shell, the part that's inedible to humans, and you've set aside the part that is an asset for human consumption. And so if you're processing 100% of the pecans to remove the shell and you're only eating the meat, then you can't blame the animals that you're feeding the shell to for your pecan crop. Now, a similar situation is happening with corn, although with corn, a greater percentage of the corn is actually grown for the livestock. About 36% every year of the world's corn is grown to feed livestock, 36%. The other 74% is going to the production of corn on the cob, corn in the can, the production of high fructose corn syrup, the production of ethanol, the production of alcoholic beverages. And these processes that produce ethanol, high fructose corn syrup, alcoholic beverages, they create industrial waste. And it's called spent grains, also known as distiller's grains. This is the leftover fibrous waste after some product has been created solely for human consumption, because humans consume alcoholic beverages, they consume biodiesel and ethanol, they consume high fructose corn syrup, and they consume soybean oil. And so 86%, according to the UN's FAO, 86% of all livestock feed is actually inedible industrial waste left over from processing, that is processing the corn and the soybean, creating some product that's destined solely for human consumption, and then the leftover garbage, rather than being piled up and burned, is being fed to animals. Myself, I'm a regenerative rotational grazing grazier. So I don't actually feed my animals these feeds. I have a pasture that I keep stockpiled for the winter, and I piece that out to my animals during the winter, and I can get them all the way through the winter grazing that stockpiled grass. I don't require any of that feed. However, like I just explained clearly, most of the feed, 86% of the feed, has not actually been grown specifically for livestock. It's actually been grown to be processed so that products can be extracted from it and consumed specifically and solely by human beings. And with that, I'll yield.
Whew. That was right at the 10-second marker. Good job. Don't always get right to the edge of the line like that. So before we get into allowing you guys to go at it on this, there's a couple of things I need you to know. I'll only interject if I need to keep the conversation on track, or if there's too much interruption, something like this, I'll bring it back where it needs to go. Expect both parties to adhere to the moderator. It's important that you do so, or else we can't even have a productive conversation. Next, to all of those people out in chat land right now, make sure that you do all the algorithm stuff for everybody who's just joining. There'll be several hundred people who'll be joining as this broadcast goes. But if you put those thumbs up, that really helps kind of bump it up in the algorithm. Also consider buying those great Crucible memberships so that you can throw shit at people from the chat, because it's just a lot of fun to do. And with that, we're going to open up the floor. Go ahead, guys. Whichever one of you wants to start. It's an open floor.
Go ahead, Allie.
So I wanted to dive into the what you mentioned about the byproduct use. If I understand correctly, the byproduct use from soy. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes. Whenever, again, 90% of the soybeans, 90% of the world's soybeans are processed to extract the oil. That oil, that soybean oil, represents 61% of the world's seed oil. So that is 100% consumed by human beings. What's left over is called soybean cake and soybean meal, and there's different grades of it depending on the processing. If it's only been crushed, it can further be processed into part of it can be separated for human consumption. If it's been processed by soaking it in hexane, which is basically gasoline, then that byproduct will go to livestock.
So that was, you said it was, I'm sorry, that was, you said 90% of global soy use was for soybean oil?
90% it can vary. It depends on what year you look. Sometimes it's 85, sometimes it's 90%, sometimes it's over 90%. Let me finish, please. Over 90% of the, I'm saying every year about 90% of the world's soybeans are processed to extract the oil. That's why they have in investing in commodities, the soybean crush spread. That is the reason that investing strategy exists, is because overwhelmingly most of the soybeans are processed to extract the oil for human consumption.
Now, where are you getting that figure of the 90% use for oil? The figure I sent to you, we sent to you in our sources. What I'm looking at, so this is from Our World in Data. So this is global use of world soy, and there's a table in that link that I sent you.
Yes, you see how it says, do you see how it says soy? It doesn't say soybeans, does it? It says soy. So the soybean oil is considered soy, and the industrial waste that they're feeding livestock is also considered soy. But they didn't say that soybeans are being fed to animals. So only 7% of the world's soybeans, as whole soybeans, are being fed to animals. The rest of the soybean that is being, the rest of the soy that's being fed to animals is industrial waste left behind after soybean extraction.
I guess I don't see how that is relevant to, like, okay, when we look at the production of soy and how much soy is used and split up for animal use and human use, right? I don't see how it matters which part of the plant is being used when we're just talking about crops produced, right? So we need
we're not talking about just crop produced. We're actually talking about, like I said earlier, using the pecan as an example. If I'm cracking all these pecans and I'm processing them to remove the nut meat for human consumption, and I'm grinding up the shells and feeding that to animals, and the shells weigh 60% of the nut, and the nut meat weighs 40% of the nut, then you can claim that 60% of pecan is fed to animals. And that's a dishonest statement, because what you want people to believe is that we're feeding whole pecans to animals, including the nut meat, but we're not. We're extracting the part out of the pecan that's valuable for human consumption, and the industrial waste, in this case, the pecan shell, we're grinding that up and feeding it to animals. Now, what you're doing is you're weighing the amount of soy meal, and you're saying that 80% of soy, meaning, and you're trying to represent something that's not true. You're trying to say that 80% of all soybeans are fed to animals, and that's not true.
No, I'm not trying to argue that this is soybean specifically. I'm trying to argue.
You agree that it's post-processing industrial waste that they're feeding to animals.
I agree that there's byproducts and there's waste as a result of the soy industry and soy processing.
Do you know how much of each soybean?
Hang on, Garland. You got to give her a chance to respond. Go ahead, Alec.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is the fact that part of this animal feed is used up by byproducts of, let's say, the soy industry. I don't see it as invalidating its impact on the environment, measuring its impact on the environment for animal use. So it doesn't matter if it's the bean, the rest of the plant that's being used. I mean, looking at these numbers here, again, you say the world's soy. Again, I'm not talking specifically about soybeans, but still, we're just looking at the crops, right? So the amount of fertilizer goes into growing these crops. If let's say the soy industry wasn't present, these animals would have to then eat something else, right? Some other animal product, or maybe some other byproduct. The industry's become more efficient in that we're using these byproducts to feed animals, but I just don't see, my point isn't that I'm not arguing about the beans specifically being eaten by the animals. I'm arguing that, that you can't, like I said, invalidate the impact on the environment for animal use by them eating this byproduct, if that makes sense.
Well, what first came along was the soybean oil. The oil was the first thing that was being extracted. Back in the 50s, up until the 50s, they were taking the leftover industrial waste, piling it up and burning it. But if you look into waste profits, Google that, profit from waste is all industries are pursuing ways to, instead of having to pay to have industrial waste disposed of, to find a way to sell it. And that's what the soybean industry did. But no, like I said, I don't feed soybean meal to my animals. I don't feed corn to my animals. I do regenerative grazing practices. So much like I'm pursuing the same plan that Joel Salatin has been doing for probably 16 years now. And with doing that, you're able to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, put it back in the soil where it has been robbed by crop agriculture. And that increases soil permeability to water. It increases the soil health, increases productivity of natural fauna, natural prairie grasses, and biodiversity. And so every time you bring the animals in for a rotation, they eat about a third of it, they poop and pee on about a third of it, and then they stomp on about a third of it. And so that leaves it poised and ready for a flora fauna explosion that happens the next time it rains. Now this is happening on pasture, not in a plowed field where the soil is hydrophobic. We're talking about a pasture where the carbon in the soil has been improved so that the water can actually soak into the ground, which is what it can't do in the fields where the corn and soybeans and the other crops where the vegan menu is derived.
So would you agree though that this is a minority of how most of the animals are produced though for animal product production and meat, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a minority. However, it's growing. In fact, there are carbon credits that farmers can now become eligible for. There's several different carbon credit programs that people, livestock, regenerative rotational grazers can actually profit from doing this. So it's a growing, it's something that's actually getting more and more prevalent. However, the point that I'm making is that, yeah, you could get rid of all of the livestock. I know that vegans are just like frothing at the mouth to remove the animals from the earth, which is ironic. But if you were to remove all of the livestock, then what you've got now is no reduction in the soybean crop, because only 7% of the soybeans are actually grown exclusively for livestock feed. The rest of what's fed to livestock is industrial waste left over after processing to produce a good that goes solely to human consumption. Cows do not drive vehicles. They do not burn biofuel. They do not drink alcoholic beverages. They do not consume high fructose corn syrup.
The transportation of their products requires, I mean, there's a
well, the same thing can be not only can the same thing be true, I said, of the vegan menu, but also all of the diesel that's burned in the process of all the destructive tillage, all of the harmful and deadly pesticides that are responsible for producing the vegan menu are also petroleum derived. The nitrogen is petroleum derived.
I just want to step in here. When you say the vegan menu, you're painting a picture of all meat coming from a regenerative type situation that you yourself run, but it's not. So these, we're talking about, it's not the vegan menu really. It's the omnivore, the meat eater menu as well. If we can disagree. I've seen different figures about the percentages of these crops that are fed to livestock in the direct grain, but still, as the system currently stands, I mean, this is the problems you're talking about still apply to agriculture as well. Do you agree?
If I snapped my fingers right now and all livestock on this earth disappeared, how much of the soybean crop, how much of the world's, how much percentage wise would that decrease the world's soybean production?
Are you saying the market effects if we snapped our fingers, removed all the livestock, what it would do to the soybean production?
I'm asking you how much. You're telling me that the livestock industry is responsible for 80% of the destructive soybean croppage. So if we remove all the livestock from the earth, percentage-wise, how much is that going to decrease soybean production?
Well, it's 70. So looking at this figure, so this is the soy, not the soybeans, but of the crop. 76 is given for animal feed. So you're saying this, I'm sure the industry will have to dealing with these, the soy industry would deal with these byproducts. They wouldn't have a market to sell them, but the market would adjust.
No, what I'm asking you is what's destructive is the soybean industry, the growing of the soybean. Okay. I'm not talking about the soy products that after they've been processed for human consumption. I'm talking about the soybean industry. The soybean industry is causing deforestation. It's causing oceanic dead zones. It's causing 3 times as much. What was the pollutant that you guys brought up earlier? It was the ammonia. The synthetic nitrogen for crop agriculture releases 3 times more ammonia than livestock does. 3 times more. So soybean agriculture produces soybeans. So when we talk about the soybean industry and you want to remove the soybeans from that picture, that's not an intellectually honest way to approach this subject. We have to bring the soybean into the picture because that's what destructive soybean agriculture is producing, is soybeans. So if you remove knowing that 90% of all the soybeans are processed to remove the oil, and 100% of that oil is being consumed by human beings, and 7% of the soybeans are grown exclusively for human consumption as whole soybeans. If you get rid of all livestock today, percentage-wise, how much will you reduce the destructive soybean production?
It's hard to say because like we were talking about this byproduct, the use of byproducts for animal feed is an industry in itself and has, that it fetches a profit. So I couldn't give you a number off the top of my head, but I just don't agree that, I guess the part about sorry?
If we get rid of livestock, because that's the question, how are they going to be making a profit off of livestock feed?
Well, they wouldn't any longer, and I think that would affect. I would think that would affect the production of soybean. I think it would affect the subsidies on soybeans.
Okay, so
and then also it's important to point out that I'm just as a vegan, I'm not advocating for all of the livestock to be removed from the earth, so to speak, and as well as I don't discount, or I'm not saying that there's not possibility for regenerative activities for animals. I just think that it's a slippery slope once we start integrating these animals into the food system, and as animal foods, then we're right back to mass exploitation, factory farming, which I think we both agree that factory farming is detrimental to environments, go across the board. I think we had a conversation about that before. I feel like we had a kind of common ground on that. But yeah, I don't, just to kind of be clear here, I know you're bringing up a hypothetical scenario, but I guess and you say all vegans, I don't think that's correct, because me as a vegan, I'm not advocating for, removing all livestock, as I don't think.
Well, I don't want to get sidetracked on that subject. I know that most vegans want animal agriculture to be abolished. Are you saying that you don't want animal agriculture to be abolished?
I'm saying I think there is how do I put this? There's more studies that need to be done, but there's a space, for having animals, ruminant animals regenerating, like you use the method of rotating them around. I see that as a separation from, including them into the food industry. If that answers your question.
So you're saying that animals should be exploited to rebuild the soil?
No, not at all.
Okay,
I'm
then
saying there's a space. I'm
it's
saying that I'm not definitively saying that there's no role for animals in a vegan world, so to speak.
Well, I don't understand that, because most vegans are for abolishing animal agriculture. So I'm not sure exactly what you're saying.
Animal agriculture being specifically raising animals for meat and their products.
For what?
For meat and and animals' other products and secretions.
Okay, but what we're talking about is the damage done by crop agriculture. Okay,
correct.
And so we have to get back to what crop agriculture produces, and in this case, it's not soy, but soybeans. And if 90% of the world's soybeans are crushed and the oil is extracted from them, and 100% of that oil is being consumed by humans, then my question still stands. If you abolish animal agriculture, okay, which is what you're saying, if you abolish animal agriculture, then how much is that going to decrease the destructive soybean farming practice, the soybean crops? How much will the soybean crops decrease in a vegan world?
Well, there would just be a higher percentage of the soybean crop used for humans.
Based on what?
The lack of meat.
So as a protein replacement,
by removing meat, that's going to decrease soybean production?
No.
Okay.
No, there is, are you saying there's no percentage of soybeans that are fed to animals?
I just said that 7% of the world's soybeans, and this is, watch me be honest, this is how it's done. 7% of the world's soybeans are fed straight to animals. They come from the field as soybeans, and they're fed to the animals as soybeans, okay? Another 5 to 7% are grown specifically for humans. The other 90% is crushed, hexane extracted. The oil is extracted from the 90% of the soybeans, and 100% of that oil is consumed by humans. It's the biggest seed oil in the world. It's a huge, powerful industry that you can't go in and dictate to. And it represents 61% of the world's seed oils. So if 90%, if humans are consuming part of 90% of every soybean in the world, then by abolishing animal agriculture, how much are you going to decrease soybean croppage?
Got it. Okay. So accepting the 90%, I would like to see a source on that and look into that, but I'm going to accept it. The 90% of the world's soybeans get extracted for oil. I see the hang up here. We're focusing on soy. So I think it would but if animal agriculture were to disappear, we would see the effects in other crops more so than others. So we would see more of an effect on the decrease in consumption of corn, let's say.
Obviously, the whole market would be turned up on its end and everything would be changed from then on out. So for us to hypothetically answer this question would be, it would make us be, intellectually dishonest or whatever you were calling us earlier.
But I see where you're asking. You're specifically asking about soy. And I think that's where I can't tell you, okay, if 90%, like you're saying, of the world's soybeans are used and extracted for oil, how would that industry change if people were no longer consuming? I don't think the consumption would go up in oil. I don't think it would increase, but I think we would see the effect more in other crops such as corn.
Okay, let's talk about corn. 36% of all corn is grown specifically to feed animals. Okay, that's no small amount. 36%. Do you hear what I'm admitting to? 36% of the world's corn is grown specifically for animals. The other The other 74%, do you know what it's grown for?
High fructose corn syrup, I'm gonna guess.
That's one, yeah. Who consumes high fructose corn syrup?
Everyone.
Human beings or animals?
Yeah.
Humans.
Okay, the other another large part of that is ethanol. A lot of that ethanol is being put in the gas, and that gas is driving fruits and vegetables around, and grains.
And animals and livestock. But yes.
Right. So when you try to blame that on livestock, you're really pointing the finger at yourself as a plant eater, because those plants also have to be transported. So that's a non-issue, right? Right.
I mean, any food, regardless if it's meat or plants, it'll have to be transported, right?
Right. So we can stop pointing at the livestock as requiring transportation, right?
Well,
unless you want to include your diet as part of that transport, that's taxing the transport ethanol as well.
I'm just saying they're equivalent. They both industries.
Right, vegans need to take responsibility for the damage that they're doing, and that's kind of why we're here.
Okay,
right?
So we won't bring up the transportation if you don't.
Well, let's not talk about the transportation, but let's talk about the fact that people are driving to work and they're using ethanol gas. Okay, they're driving here and there. That ethanol is for human consumption. There is no cow. You will not see a cow driving a milk truck.
But we're discussing food.
Right. We're talking about crops. We're talking about crops, because the vegans like to say that the crops are all grown for the animals. And that's why we're here, is because those lies have to be destroyed. And that's what we're going to do today.
But it was when we agreed on the premise of this debate, it was the plant-based diet versus animal-based diet harm on the environment currently in the world.
No, human consumption. What you're trying to do is split hairs. You're trying to win a debate.
That's why we spent 2 hours on the premise and
you're trying to
make sure we got down to the exact premise we were going to talk about.
Hang on, guys. Hang on. Real quick. I'm trying, as I was listening here and I'm taking notes. If we're talking about the transportation of food, we're talking about the growing of food, we're talking about who consumes the food, we're talking about all those issues. That sounds, and then the diet, as far as the dietary aspect goes, and then another aspect of this is the impact that it has on the environment. So if we're talking about the vegan diet and the carnivore diet and the impact it has on the environment, then all of what's been talked about so far is totally valid.
Yeah, we were trying to only talk about the environmental impact, not the health impact. And I think Garland's just an omnivore. I don't think he's a carnivore.
Well, right, but I mean, if you're talking about the environmental impact of these things, then so far I don't see any problem with any of the things that have been brought up.
With ethanol?
Yeah,
consuming ethanol as food?
Well, no, but that would be a necessary entailment of an environmental impact.
Copy.
Yeah. So if you say, in other words, we want to talk about the diet and the impact this diet has on the world, then the necessary entailment there is everywhere that food goes, and whatever's brought up with the food as a necessary impact on the world is valid. There's no way for me to get around that. Yeah. So.
It was specifically harm to the environment, but I guess ultimately that works.
I was just bringing up the Garland. You were talking, I guess, the ethanol. You were discussing the transportation of plant foods, right? Is that why you're bringing that up?
No, because what I said was that 36% of the world's corn is grown specifically to feed animals, but the other 64% is grown specifically to produce goods for human consumption. And so what I keep running into is that I point out how deadly and destructive crop agriculture is, not just corn and soybean, but apples, oranges, pears, bananas, avocados. It's all using neonicotinoid pesticides, petroleum, tillage, flooding, runoff, dead zones, and all of that is being blamed on livestock by the vegan community. And what I'm doing is I'm pointing out that 86% of the feed that's being given to livestock is industrial waste. You asked, well, is there any crop that's being grown specifically for animals? Yes. 14% of the crops that are fed to animals are grown specifically to feed the animals. The other 86% is industrial waste left over from the soybean industry, extracting the oil, and the corn industry, ethanol, high fructose corn syrup, alcoholic beverages.
You're saying there's no other use for these wastes, as you call them?
No, I agree with you on that. I think that we can find other things to do with that livestock, the livestock industry needs to drop the crop industry on its head and let them deal with their own industrial wastes and get back to doing regenerative rotational grazing to begin the process of repairing and reversing the damage done by the crop industry.
Soy meal is used in human and animal food, kibble, and stuff like that, protein supplements. So there are uses for soy meal.
What percentage of soy meal?
It's small now, but of course you're saying as if there's no other use for it and they just got to burn it out front.
No. What I'm saying is if you're going to blame the soybean, and that's your opening statement, Allie's opening statement, she talked about how destructive the corn and soybean industries are, the croppage, and she blamed that on the livestock industry, and she even said that 80% of soy is being fed to animals. But that was, at that point, it's just like all the other vegans. They either don't know or they think that they can fool the people into thinking that whole soybeans are being fed to animals. Here's the deal, is that just like whenever you take a pecan and you shell it and you move the nut meat over here and you move the shell over here.
This is the third time you've told us the story. We can move on from the nut story.
And you've got the shell weighing 60% of the pecan and the nut meat weighing only 40% of the pecan, and then you feed the nuts to some animal, and then you claim that 60% of the pecans are being fed to the animal. That's not a true statement.
Well, I am a bit confused here too. I do understand the position from Garland, but I'm not exactly sure what the counter argument is. If you guys could flesh that out to me, because I'm not exactly sure what your counter argument to this is. I understand he is repeating this. That's true, but I think he's repeating it because he feels like he hasn't gotten an answer to it. So I'm happy to give you guys the floor, but what is the answer to this?
I'm not separating the, how do I put this? I'm not separating the role that the animal agriculture industry has in eating the soy plant. So you're talking about, you're specifically looking at the soybean. I'm saying we can't separate the role, the contribution that animal agriculture has in using this byproduct from the soy plant. I don't see that separation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think I understand that, but what he's saying is within the confines of the opening statement, you were saying that the consumption of 80% of this is grown for the purposes of animal consumption. His distinction is, no, I don't believe that 80% is actually grown for the purpose of animal consumption, but that rather it's separated and the animals get the byproduct. Is that correct, or is it not correct? Because if it's a yield on one side, we can move on. Otherwise, we're just going to be going over the same topic over and over and over again. So if there's no counter argument, there's usually a yield.
He's discussing he's saying the only value in the plant is the bean, and I'm saying the whole plant has value.
No, I'm with you. I
Okay.
understand that, right? But he's specifically referencing is the opening statement of the claim made that 80% of this is for human consumption, period. He's saying there's a separation there.
If I said soybeans, then I would concede, but I didn't say soybeans. I said soy. So I'm just I conceded on I'll accept the 90% of soybeans are in the world are processed for soy oil. That is the majority used for human consumption.
Okay, gotcha. So
where
did you guys want to move from here, Jeffrey and Allie? What was the meat of what you wanted to get into?
I would like to present some of the figures we have for the harm done directly from animal agriculture.
Go ahead.
Okay, so looking at the emissions from fertilizer. So let me just bring up a little table here. So from the One World Data, ourworldindata.org. So looking at eutrophying emissions we can look at 1,000 kilocalories and per kilogram, just representing different food products. If you look, it's all animal products are far in front of plant products, especially these staple plant products. So we're looking at eutrophying emissions per 1,000 kilocalories. Let's see here. So corn is at 0.9 grams. And then let's say compared to beef, let's say beef herd. So that's beef that's used for meat. That's 110.4 grams. So 110.4 grams versus 0.9 grams. And that's eutrophying emissions per 1,000 kilocalories. And then just to clarify, eutrophying emissions represent runoff of nutrients measured in grams of phosphate equivalent. So this is phosphate pollution. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at those graphs, Garland.
Oh yeah, I'm very well versed in Our World Data. That is an outlet that's financed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who are heavily invested in plant-based meat replacement, ultra-processed junk food. So it doesn't surprise me that certain claims. This is the same source that says that 80% of the soy is going to livestock. It doesn't tell the whole story. I know that y'all kind of want to put that in a box and say, well, the value is not in the soybean, but actually the value is in the soybean, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about soy. So when you talk about claims that are being made by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with absolutely nothing to back it up. What we're dealing with from Bill Gates, in this case with our World Data, just like with the soybean, is that was a half truth. Just like I said, people get the wrong idea when you tell them that livestock are consuming 80% of all soy produced.
I would disagree that it's a half truth. I mean, soy is soy, and I get what you're saying about the soybean. Again, we're back to the plant versus the bean. But just to clarify, I mean, this is not
the plant is not. What part of the plant, other than the bean, is being used, and for what?
Are you asking me for animal
feed? Yeah, you're saying that
animal feed. I thought we were going to go back.
The value of the soybean plant is not in the bean.
You're asking me? I thought we were past this. No, there's value. Most of the values in the bean, but there is value in the plant now as a byproduct.
Are we passing soy, or are we going back to it?
Well, she brought it up.
Oh, no, I was comparing. No, I was comparing corn to the eutrophying emissions of per 1,000 kilocalories of corn compared to beef is what I'm looking at right now. And then and this was from Our World in Data. I know you mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but this specifically what I'm looking at, this is it's a meta study. So it's looking at multiple studies. If you look at the table, it cites the specific study of where
if you look down to your lower right of your screen, you'll see the private chat. You can actually post that in the private chat, and then Garland can look at whatever it is.
He's got it. We sent it to him. He's got it.
Okay.
I mean, you guys could look at it, but he's had our stuff.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So
Yeah.
you don't agree with the data I
No,
presented as far as
it's
Eutrophication?
very much like that, like the way they were spinning the soybean. I don't want to bring the soybean up again, but that was a spin. The way that's presented by Our World Data is a spin to lead people with the idea that 80% of the soybeans are grown specifically to feed livestock. And that's the idea that Our World Data is trying to get across to people. And it's a half truth, and it's not true. It gives people the wrong idea. Same with this, is that what's being factored in there is the energy and resources that go into growing the 80% of the soybeans, for example. And so that's being factored into the livestock needs when it's not being categorized in the due to the fact that the soybeans are actually being processed, and what's being fed to the animals cannot be attributed solely to the animals in that way, because human beings are consuming at least a little bit of almost every soybean produced. So trying to say this many calories, and the other thing is that I counseled elite athletes for 15 years in the area of strength conditioning and nutrition. And the idea that human beings can subsist on just a generic calories is outrageous. I think it's harmful to even suggest to simplify things down to just a calorie, especially when we have vegan babies dying, vegan parents going to prison because they're starving their babies of the essential nutrients.
Omnivorous babies dying as well.
Lots of omnivorous babies dying. A lot of obese.
These babies are not getting the nutrients that are available in animal products. In animal products, you're going to find nutrients like B12 and K2, MK4, and neither one of those are you going to get in plants. And so this whole idea that you can say, well, it takes this much energy to produce this many calories, that's intellectually dishonest, because you're not talking about proper human nutrition. And then you're not factoring in the resources that go into the industrial manufacturing of all these synthetic vitamins that you would require from some corporation that you're going to have to trust to send you a plastic bottle via ethanol every time you turn around.
So they also provide eutrophying emissions per kilogram of food product.
That one puts beef even worse.
Yeah, so I'm just looking. So again, just sticking with comparing corn to this beef herd beef, we're at, so emissions per, not looking at calories, but per kilogram of food product, where we have corn at 4.03 grams versus beef at 300.4 grams.
So considering Bill Gates is a owner of cattle farms as well as a big soy guy, GMO soy guy, what do you think what type of influence do you think he has on these numbers? And do you have the citations to prove what you're saying in any way?
Well, I've not seen any evidence that he owns cattle farms. However, I'm not saying that he doesn't. If he does, then why is he pursuing all of these plant-based mock meats that are nutritionally deficient? Make money. What I was asking you is, I looked at that page, and what do you say about this? None of the resources that go into producing synthetic vitamins that vegans can't get naturally, those numbers are not worked into that. Did you notice that?
What supplements are we taking? Are you assuming we take? And isn't B12 supplemented to cows?
No,
in cattle field?
Not.
Sure it is.
No, it's not.
Sure.
That's another. No, he just asked me a question. Let me answer it, please, Allie.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, B12 is not supplemented to cows. Cows have bacteria in their rumens that produce B12, and it's actually a type of B12 called cyanocobalamin. Humans cannot use cyanocobalamin. It's not bioactive in humans. All they need is some cobalt. There are some places in the world where the soil is deficient in cobalt. And in those areas, they give them cobalt blocks to lick. And it's cobalt mixed with salt. and that way they can get the cobalt so that their rumen bacteria can make the B12. But no, they're not supplementing B12. They're supplementing cobalt, and the cow is manufacturing B12 in the stomach naturally. So no, that is more vegan misinformation that all cows are supplemented. I
didn't say all cows in the least bit.
Okay, well, you said cows.
Some, yeah. Do you agree some are?
What
you did admit some
percentage?
are.
What percentage?
I'm not prepared to talk about that right now. I asked you a question.
I'm telling you that the mainstream supplementation that is associated with B12 is the mineral cobalt, and that is not a widespread. I've never supplemented cobalt. No one that I know in the cattle industry has ever supplemented cobalt.
Going back to what you mentioned about just specifically these supplements for vegans, I mean, the B12 deficiency is a very common problem across, I mean, even omnivores.
It's actually more common in vegans. It's more common in vegans.
But it's still a very common issue amongst omnivores. I'm just saying you painted the picture like it's only the supplements are being made for vegans when that isn't true.
Well, I can explain why that is. Human beings historically would eat an animal nose to tail. The liver, for instance, has 10 to 20 times the B12 that you get in the muscle meat. So human beings in developed countries have been brainwashed to eat just the muscle meat. So omnivores are not getting an adequate amount of B12 either. But that doesn't mean that you can't get B12 from animals. It just means that people need to eat more organ meats, and then they wouldn't be B12 deficient. Okay. So there is a part of the animal that contains adequate B12, but there is no part of any plant, period, end of story, that contains bioactive B12 in humans.
I mean, we're getting a little off topic here. I mean, this is into the health, nutrition.
Well, when you brought up calories, you opened that door when you started talking about calories. Humans can't exist on calories alone, nor foodstuffs. What did you say? The alternative to that was food product.
I use the example to measure the amount of eutrophying emissions. It's just as a measure of a figure to measure per.
When you talk about food product, you have to have the end result has to be human nutrition, human sustenance. And so if you're just talking about calories or food products, and you're not specifying that this is nutritious food that humans.
But our debate right now isn't about nutrition, though. We're just discussing harm onto the environment. So I use as an example just a measure of value to base these.
And I think and that's totally fair to do. You can do that, but I think that the response is also fair if he's addressing this singular point. So I think both sides presented a fair argument. If you want to move to the next one, that's fine. Go ahead.
So I'd like to bring up hay and alfalfa production. GMO alfalfa, primarily grown to feed dairy cows, is bred specifically to be resistant to herbicides, as well as hay production, perennial grasses used for livestock. All green plants require the same conditions to grow, including hay. I mean, this was a big.
Hang on. I think we lost Garland there for a second. Okay,
sorry about that.
He's back. Yeah, no problem. From time to time, things drop out. Go ahead, Allie.
Yeah. So just looking back, this kind of goes back into both looking at crop deaths as well as fertilizer production, where it's going. We can't avoid looking at beef, grass-fed, and where their food is coming from. All of these criticisms against crops, all of these problems we have with crop production this equally applies to animals.
Okay, I'm ready for this. Mm-hmm. Okay, the majority of what the animals are consuming is natural forages on pasture. Like my cows are not eating. It's winter. My cows have not eaten any hay. My goats have not eaten any hay. They're only eating natural forages. I'm operating my operation so that the animals can feed, just as the bison, antelope, elk, and deer, ruminant animals can actually survive without all of these crops. But let's talk about the crops.
Quick question: is your farm exactly how the majority of the farms are in the United States?
They're not, but I am part of the group that's spearheading a growing number of animal agriculture. We're getting away from relying on crops. It's way too expensive. It's causing the beef to be more expensive in the grocery store. It's destructive because it relies on crop agriculture, and it's regenerative. As far as what we're doing is we're sequestering carbon back into the soil. Is it the status quo? Absolutely not. But that's not the point. Is what I was trying to get to. I was just throwing a personal anecdote in there. Okay. But what the relevant information is that the percentage of cropland that goes to feed animals hay and alfalfa is 4.27% of the world's crops. 4.27%. So how are you trying to put the blame on the shoulders of 4.27% of the crops now? I mean, is it relevant? Yes, all of these crops that use industrial petro and agrochemicals are relevant and need to be reduced and phased out. I totally agree. What I don't agree with is the idea that crop agriculture, by and large, is to be blamed on livestock, because we've already showed in the soybean example that that's absolutely not true. I can illustrate the same situation in corn. We kind of went over that, and now we're trying to shift the blame onto hay and alfalfa when it represents only 4.27% of the crops. So is there something substantive that you can point to where animal agriculture is destructive if it's separated from crop agriculture, or is all of the destruction that livestock is responsible for caused by its association, any association that it has with the crop agriculture, the same crop agriculture that produces the items on the vegan menu?
No, yeah, absolutely not. Again, looking at, I know you don't agree with this source, but the eutrophizing emissions, we look at organic pollution and effect of people living in proximity to animal agriculture areas. The alfalfa and hay aspect. I mean, again, I think this is we're coming back to, and I sort of predicted we agree on various aspects of how the mass production food industry is detrimental, right? But where we disagree is if what from my understanding what this debate was, we disagree on currently a plant-based diet versus an animal-based diet, which does more harm to the environment. Again, we could both argue till the cows come home about what a vegan world would look like, what a full a grazing land mammal world would look like, where we're all eating meat. But as it currently stands, I don't see animal agriculture being less harmful than
okay. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example here. I'm going to link. I sent this to y'all earlier, but I want you to look at it. It's in the private chat if you want to pull that up.
And again, these are all going down into the chat as well, so that they have access to the information that you guys have.
Okay.
Oh.
So this is nitrogen ammonia emissions from agricultural nitrogen fertilization application. Again, the hay represents 4.27% of the crops, and humans are consuming the vast majority of all of the other crops that are receiving synthetic nitrogen fertilization. So if you go down to about midway on the paragraph, you see the statement. It starts with global, and it says global agriculture ammonia emissions from the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and manure in 2014 were estimated to be 2.32 and 3.79 kilograms of ammonia per year, respectively. Now look at that last word, respectively. What that means is, remember, go back to earlier in the sentence, and it says global agriculture ammonia emissions from the use of synthetic fertilizer, that's crop agriculture, and manure, and that's manure from livestock, were estimated to be 12.32 and 3.79. So that shows you right there that the emissions from the synthetic fertilizer used in crop agriculture is 3 times higher, more than 3 times higher than animal agriculture.
Gotcha. So I'm looking at, agriculture, I think I sent you this link. So looking at the total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, so this is from 2020. I'm looking at this pie chart.
EPA.gov.
Let me put this link in the chat. So it shows agriculture representing 11% of the total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. Let me just get this over to you. So basically, looking at the emissions from agriculture, let's see. So manure management accounts for 12% of total greenhouse gas emissions from the agriculture economic sector in the United States. So, sorry, I just lost the StreamYard. Where am I? Yeah.
And while she looks that up, I just wanted to let everybody know we hit the goal right already. People are very much enjoying this debate, so we appreciate it very much. And if you do get that study, please put it in the private chat.
There it is. I got it. Okay.
Okay, great. That way I can get it down to the chat. They actually like to look at that stuff, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up here on this window so I can look at it. There we go. Yeah, so if you go into the agriculture section of that pie chart right there. There we are.
Man, you could have just did this yourself. I don't even need to be here.
Hey, well, jump in if you can. Okay, so here it says this, the methane produced from livestock, especially ruminants, accounts for 1/4 of the emissions from the agriculture economic sector. So
that's a bit more than
4%.
1/4, huh?
Yeah.
And it comes with
You see
B12.
the pie chart there, the agriculture section I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't exactly understand your point.
In comparison to the methane emissions from livestock animals compared to the paper that you just
okay. I see what they haven't included in there yet. So let me show you what they're failing to factor in. I'll link it in the private chat for you.
Cool.
Okay, I've got that as well.
No, hold on. That's the wrong one.
Okay.
All right.
All right, got that as well. And I'll get that down in the chat. And so, what is it that you're saying they're missing? Not to divert the train of thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, what they're not factoring in on those numbers that she just referred to is this this information here has not been factored in. I've looked at that paper and it does not factor this in. It turns out that the fertilizer plants haven't quite been honest with us. That it was Cornell University tested the actual emissions coming off of the methane emissions coming off of these fertilizer plants relied upon by the crop agriculture that they're defending. And you'll see that there in the text, the researchers discovered that methane emissions from ammonia fertilizer plants were 100 times higher than the fertilizer industry self-reported estimate. So the fertilizer industry underreported their own methane emission by 100 times. Now, if you move on down the page, you see a quote from one of the actual researchers. And he says, let me see how the, yeah, hold on. Yeah, that second paragraph says, we took one small industry that most people have never heard of, and we found that its methane emissions were 3 times higher than the EPA assumed was emitted by all industrial production in the United States. 3 times higher than all industrial production in the United States. Now, without this methane emitting nitrogen fertilizer, you've got no crop agriculture. The crop agriculture, including the crops that the vegan menu relies upon, relies on this methane.
The omnivore menu.
These numbers have not been worked in. I have looked and they're not in there. So they're omitting. What you've got is you've got a bunch of corporations that are looking to improve profits, and that includes all.
Can you prove this?
Well, have you seen the Bayer-Monsanto merger?
Well, it's not exactly what I was asking for. It seems like you're appealing to your own authority.
Bayer is a drug company, and Monsanto is a fertilizer and soybean company, soybean and corn. So you've got both of those under the same corporate umbrella now. Are you saying that this corporation is not doing everything it can to make profits?
Sure it is.
Okay. Well, how else are you going to explain that when they report these methane emissions from cattle, that they omit important information like the fact that the synthetic nitrogen production relied upon by crop agriculture, the same crop agriculture that the vegan menu relies upon? Why aren't they working those numbers into their algorithm? Is it because if they did, that the demonization of livestock would come to a screeching halt? I say yes, it would. The audience can look at that science that I just put out there, and they can make up their own mind on whether or not to believe the vegan propaganda that livestock is responsible for all of this destruction, when we know for a fact that it's the fertilizers and the crop agriculture, the same crop agriculture that vegan would be nowhere without.
And animal agriculture is tied right up in that plant agriculture and those crops. As we both agree, the mass food production system right now is flawed and is harmful. You cannot separate from the animal agriculture aspect from the crop production.
You're arguing as a carnivore dieter who's saying not.
No, I'm not a carnivore. I'm not a carnivore dieter.
That's what you're arguing, though.
You guys are
arguing that you have that anyone who eats the vegetable has blood on their hands, and that it has nothing to do with the crops or the cattle. But
No, we're not.
as
No,
if you aren't
people
someone
who eat
who also eats vegetables.
no people who eat meat are not running around wearing a tutu, virtue signaling about
At all.
how
Appealing
morally.
to
We're not the ones virtue signaling.
not an
The vegans
argument.
are the ones, and the vegans are the ones that are demonizing livestock agriculture. So that's the
appealing
point.
to
Is that
ridicule is not an argument.
everything that the vegans and the corporate overlords that are pushing veganism, everything that they're saying livestock is responsible for, it's crop agriculture that's doing it. Every single one, every single thing is actually to blame on crop agriculture.
It sounds like you're demonizing crop agriculture, like vegans demonize animal agriculture.
You did that in your opening statement. You explained how crop agriculture is causing oceanic dead zones, etc. But you took that and you blamed it on livestock. And I've explained very clearly that what we're feeding livestock is industrial waste byproducts.
Well, I guess where we disagree is that you're not accepting the source for the eutrophying emissions, but maybe we can have another debate where you bring, something or a rebuttal to that. If you don't mind, can we go back to when we were discussing the greenhouse gas emissions? I found the bit of information I was looking for. So that the link that I sent, so it says here, so it talked about the methane production from livestock represents over a quarter of the emissions from that agricultural economic sector, that 11% out of the whole pie chart. The other, so it was 12%. Another 12% is is manure management. So it's the manure, the feces from those animals. So if you take about a quarter plus 12%, that's about half of that agriculture economic sector. That greenhouse gas emission is attributed then to animal agriculture. So from what I'm seeing on this pie chart, it seems it's about even as far as the emissions there of greenhouse gas emissions from what I can see. And again, that's in that link I sent there if you want to check.
No, I'm well schooled on this. Listen, in countries like in the Netherlands right now, where they're putting caps on nitrogen fertilizer, they're putting caps that are so stringent that it's threatening famine. And so what the crop farmers are having to do is finally turn to the livestock farmers and say, we want to buy your manure. We want to buy your manure so that we can fertilize our fields. We're going to now rely on livestock agriculture to produce crops. Now, the reason why you've got these emissions that you talk about is because crop agriculture has shunned the livestock producer and the wastes that they're producing. That manure could be spread over the fields. That's organic produce, and that's
wouldn't that still contribute to emissions, even if it's
no.
used for
The reason those emissions are occurring, number one, is because they're sitting there in holding ponds. Number two, right now here in the United States, we've got 90 million domestic ruminant animals, 90 million. And you've got 25 million wild ruminants. So that's 115 ruminants total in the contingent United States portion of North America. If you go look at the estimates of ruminants in the past, pre-European settlement, 1800 and earlier, you've got 160 million ruminants that existed in the same area. That's what you call natural emissions. The cattle are just replacing what the bison were producing before. So it's just like with composting. Composting.
Do you have anything that proves that the bison and the cow emit the same amount of stuff and there's the same amount of livestock and all that stuff as they used to be? Not cool that, yeah.
Jeffrey, I included that with my first.
Was that the one that was from 1989?
The estimates from the 1800s haven't changed since 1989, Jeffrey. We're talking about pre-European settlements.
Okay, which article was that? Two of your articles didn't come through. I asked you for them back, and you never sent them.
Well, I never saw that.
So which article was this?
This is not one article. I had to pull these from multiple articles.
Okay, well, what did you send us? That's all I'm concerned with.
Gentlemen. We are an hour and a half into the debate. We actually have to get to closing statements. We got a bunch of people who want to call in, talk to both sides of this thing. So that's going to happen. And we've got a bunch of super chats to get through. Garland, very just kind of my own 2 cents before you make the closing, but very strong showing. I was happy to have you on the Crucible, man. I hope you can come back at some point. Jeffrey and Ollie, you get to close last. Garland, you can go ahead and give your closing first, and we're going to let them close last as they open first. Go ahead. You have 7 minutes, by the way, uninterrupted.
Okay. All right. This debate was very much like every debate or conversation I've had with a vegan. It starts out with them trying to demonize livestock agriculture. They actually do that by describing how deadly and destructive crop agriculture is. And then they try to attribute the majority of crop agriculture as growing crops exclusively for livestock. Once you flesh that out, just like we flesh out the pecan, flesh out the soybean, and you find out that even the United Nations FAO is telling us that 86% of all livestock feed around the world is actually industrial waste that's not even edible for humans. And the reason that's relevant is because the vegans are actually claiming that if we can abolish livestock agriculture, then we can reduce the harmful crop agriculture by 80 or 90%. But once, like I said, once you flesh that out and you find that human beings are taking 20% of every soybean as the oil, and then another 7% as of the whole soybean as things like edamame, and then you find out that only 7% of the soybean crop is growing specifically to feed livestock. So 7% is the truth, and 80% is the half truth. So which one is true? Well, the truth is the truth, the part that's being grown specifically for livestock, which goes back to their attempted point, which is if we just get rid of livestock, we won't have to grow all these soybeans. We can decrease soybean production by 80 or 90%. But that's not true, because 90% of all soybeans are processed to extract the oil, and human beings are consuming in one form or another that soybean oil. A very similar case with corn. The next thing that the vegans will do is start talking about per calorie, and these are people that know absolutely nothing about nutrition. Don't really seem, I've noticed a lot of vegans have, and a lot of them are very open about being misanthropes. They actually hate the human species and wish that it would go extinct. So it doesn't surprise me that much that they keep going to this calories instead of trying to come up with a source of calories that doesn't require all this petroleum-based synthetic vitamin manufacturing and plastic bottles being shipped all over the world. And we didn't even talk about all the fruits and vegetables that are shipped in from other countries. If you were to just eat locally, how many fruits and vegetables would you be consuming? Like around here, you might get some wild plums once a year for 2 weeks. But and that's the case with most geographical regions, is that if they don't they don't burn a bunch of diesel to ship those bananas in, ship those grapes in, ship those kiwis in, those papayas and those mangoes, and keep shipping them in, burn that diesel like there's no tomorrow. And diesel is a finite resource. What's going to happen when the diesel runs out? Well, I think what they're planning is for the human population to be reduced so much that we won't have to worry about that. That's what I think. And so, what exactly is veganism? To me, it's a bunch of half truths that are being told to the population. It's coming from from victims of veganism. It's coming from misanthropic activists, animal rights activists. And who's funding these? Well, you know, I've got a video on my channel that illustrates very clearly that Earthling Ed is being financed, at least partially, by a corporation that makes big profits selling neonicotinoid pesticides. These are the same pesticides that are driving many species of wild animal straight into extinction. And so it's a very hypocritical movement. I don't see it as honest. And this conversation that we've had today really wasn't any different than the last 5,000 conversations that I've had with vegans.
Thank you so much for that closing statement, Garland. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to move over to Jeffrey and Allie for your closing statement. I will tell you guys both a bit of chastisement from us here in the Crucible. We usually do these debates one-on-one. I consider the two of you showing up to be basically akin to cheating. I'm not exactly sure how we ended up with 2 brains against 1 brain in this debate, but totally and completely unfair. I did allow it just to see where it would go, and it seemed like it didn't make much of a difference. But just saying for future reference, I'm not saying you guys can't come back to the Crucible. I'm just saying that if you do and you have a one-on-one debate, make sure it's one-on-one. Anyway, go ahead.
I've seen several of your videos where you had a couple people and it seemed
each individual box has 1 person in it.
Okay. Didn't know I had to split.
Yeah, anyway, I would just appreciate that in the future. Anyway, go ahead with your closing.
All right, yeah, I wasn't sorry about that. I wouldn't have wasn't aware. But yeah,
we cleared it with Garland first.
Yeah, I maybe that's true, but I'm running the show and I didn't know, right? So the thing is like if he had freaked out and said I'm not debating against 2 people, I definitely would have closed the entire show down and said that's totally unfair. But since he was fine with it, it went fine. No problem.
I don't remember ever clearing that. However, it doesn't bother me. Okay. I don't remember ever being approached with that idea. Now, the last time that we spoke was on a live stream, and the 2 of you showed up together, but you never did say, "Hey, is it okay if both of us team up against you in a live debate on the Crucible?" That was never brought up to me. And if it was,
if you check the emails that we've given each other, I most definitely asked you.
Okay, but
it was okay.
I get it. Okay, I understand. I'm just saying that fundamentally we pride ourselves more than anything on fairness, which I was fair in your guys' entire debate. Can't say anything different than that, regardless of me being on the opposite side of you ideologically. But that to me is fundamentally unfair. So just for future reference, okay? Anyway, go ahead with your closing 7 minutes. There was a light chastisement, believe me, coming from me, light chastisement. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'll end off here. Like I said in the beginning, we're aware the plant agriculture and animal agriculture industries are very much intertwined. Again, as a result of increased efficiency in the industries and government subsidies. The fact of the matter is, though, that animals, once we begin integrating them into our food system, even, let's say we're looking at animals for use of, let's say for regeneration of land, once they start being integrated into our food system, we slip into factory farming, mass exploitation, shipping animals for their flesh and secretions, and all those negative repercussions. Again, I just want to repeat, 9.5 billion land animals are directly killed for food in the U.S. alone each year. And that's not including marine animals. If you include that, that's 55 billion animals killed for direct human consumption. I agree. We agree we can do better in all sectors as far as eliminating this harm, these deaths, and the harm done to the environment. But as it still stands, both the resources needed to raise animals, what goes into maintaining these animals and processing them, we believe it does more harm to the environment. And I yield.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for that very spirited debate. I learned a shitload, and I know the chat did too, actually from both sides. That was actually very good. I really appreciate it. Sometimes when you do the studies debate, they can be very dry and boring, but surprisingly, I found this one extremely informative, and I appreciate it very much. So I'm going to hop into the callers, and we'll go through some callers here. Big Hoss, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for waiting so patiently in the background. I appreciate it very much. Go ahead with your question and who it's for.
My question is for Mr. Farms. How do you feel about, instead of the government subsidizing corn and soy, instead we subsidize your proposal of the type of regenerative treatment to the soil so we can have a better world and better livestock, all that?
Absolutely, that's exactly what needs to happen. If you were just right now, the livestock subsidies are about 1/100th of the crop agricultural subsidies. So what the vegans do is they try to take like with the soybeans, they take 80% of the subsidies for the soybean industry, and they attribute that money going to livestock. Intellectually dishonest as you can be. If you were to take all the money that's going to the corn and soybean industry right now and funnel that into the pockets of livestock farmers who are motivated to sequester carbon from the atmosphere and put it back in the soil where it once was, so that the soil can grow lush vegetation again without relying on synthetic fertilizers, then that would be a godsend for this country. In fact, it may be our only way out of this situation. And I think that's a great observation and a great option. I just wish that the government wasn't as tied up with the corn and soybean industries and the fertilizer industries.
And then Jeffrey Nally, just so you guys know, in the call-in section, you can also engage with the caller on the question, even if the question wasn't directed at you. When the person who it is directed at's finished, if you want to engage with this, you can go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't think any subsidies should go towards anything food. I think all subsidies should be abolished.
I just disagree. I think it'd be very helpful, but no.
Okay. Did you have anything else, Big Hoss?
No, Garland, you did amazing.
Thank you.
I don't
Big
care
Hoss.
if you were slow. You did awesome, man.
Thank you, brother.
Well, Big Hoss,
it's really helpful to be slow because, like,
you sound a little slow, Big Hoss. What's going on with that? What's going?
I'm just from Alabama, dude. What you mean? What you talking about? Slow?
Anyway, go ahead. Finish your call. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to tell Garland he did awesome, and I think it's really productive to be slow a little bit more because, like, it helps digest the conversation more and not get wrapped up in like fast questions that get out and then the conversation gets sidetracked. But I mean, it's really refreshing to hear. It was really great.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the call, Big Hoss. Have
Thank
yourself
you, Big Hoss.
a wonderful night. The machine lies. If you're not so stoned you're about to fall over in your couch, if you can manage to ask a question in a coherent way, I would just adore that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty coherent at the moment. I'm going to address the use of technology and I guess large scale farming. And I think the brother Garland here brought up some good points in terms of the use of chemical pesticides in terms of large scale farming and how that's also destructive to the environment. If something is destructive to the environment, it naturally follows that it's destructive to life and ecosystems and so on and so forth. Like the use of pesticides, one of the first times pesticides were used were by Fritz Haber, who was a Nazi scientist. He was actually inventing Zyklon B, and then he accidentally invented something that kills pests and other forms of life. And then he actually found that if you introduce petroleum to ammonium nitrate, you could get synthetic nitrogen. And then that synthetic nitrogen is responsible for runoffs in the water, and they cause dead zones in the water. So, I mean, all the damage to life and ecosystems and animals is being caused not by animal farming, but by the use of industrial technology that's used for large scale monoculture that destroys biodiversity and all forms of life. So, wouldn't you oppose the use of large scale technology and go back to simpler methods of farming? Like Brother Garland is doing, you know, when they turn all these fucking lights and computers off, we're going to have to rely on what Brother Garland is doing and not on what Jeffrey and Ali are doing, because that method would put us into the use of scientists, put us into the hands of scientists, industrial scientists that we need to produce pesticides that are actually destroying the environment. Because in order to grow plants and monoculture, wide scale plant agriculture, you need to produce pesticides. Because when you see a field of bananas, nature doesn't support a field of bananas. You know, it destroys it because nature supports biodiversity. So what's your response to that? Isn't the use of technology destroying ecosystems and not animal farming? And isn't that same use of technology used for farming vegetables? I mean,
Is that that's directed at the vegans?
yeah, the vegans,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so like as I referenced in my closing statement, the ideal vegan world, at least with us vegans, you know, I hear what you're saying. The ideal vegan world would incorporate permaculture, the use of more perennial grains for human consumption, more, you know, home farms. I mean, I see there's a lot of work that can be done as far as living holistically with the land, not necessarily incorporating animals and still, you know, eating plants while still regenerating environments and human conditions in societies. If that answers your question.
Did you have a follow-up? Machine Lies, if you have a follow-up, you can ask it.
Well, if Brother Garland would like to interact with that statement, that would be fine.
Yeah, the answer that Ali gave right there to me just seemed very, very hollow. You know, talking about, well, we can produce perennial greens for human beings to eat, but we just make sure that we don't do it with animals. You know, what you're talking about is you're talking about the destruction that's being caused by the pesticides, which are all petrochemicals. These are all your pesticides are made with petroleum. Petroleum is a finite resource. At some point, you're going to run out. So veganism is a dead-end street. And
is land a finite resource?
Right now,
when you're going to hit a wall with your grass-fed in the Midwest somewhere, you're going to hit a wall pretty quickly if you're going to be feeding billions of people. It's not as easy. We have factory farming now for a reason, because there's no other way of doing it without factory farming.
That's absolutely not.
Land is definitely a finite.
That's absolutely not true. Land is finite, but we're not going to run out feeding animals off of the natural fauna and flora. Like I explained to you earlier, Jeffrey, I used Joel Salatin as an example, and he's getting more than 400 cow days per acre now from the lush vegetation that he's produced, from the enriched soil that he's produced using rotational grazing of ruminant animals. What is 400 cow days per acre? That means 1 acre can feed 1 cow 400 days straight. And he's getting more than 400 cow days per acre now.
Coming from?
It comes from the sky. Do you think when a cow drinks the water that it goes into a black hole?
Raining? What if you don't have a lot of rainfall? What if?
Yeah, it's regionally dependent. Sorry.
Yeah, like you're talking about in an ideal circumstance. Maybe on your farm you can do that, but for billions and billions of people, you're not going to be able to do it in the U.S. without us living amongst the cows.
Well,
and then feeding the people in the cities. What are they going to do? They can't have a cow, several cows in their yard.
well, we don't have to have several cows in our yard, but we do need to have more family farms. We need people to move out of the cities and into the country. The more small farms we have, the more food security we have. And this whole idea of everyone living in cities, that is a
blown over the United States. That looks like a giant farm. It looks like a huge farm.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The use of large scale food production that's supported by monoculture, that's supported by international trade. In order to grow a plant for monoculture, you have to use pesticides and petrochemicals. So why won't you address that? You need global corporation, you need scientists for this vegan project to take off.
Well, we're not. I mean, we had a big discussion before this, and we agreed that clearly things aren't being done right today. And so we're kind of past that point. We're kind of trying to, set this thing to rest so we can move on to other things. But we're not doing anything right now. I mean, if anything, the researching this topic has shown us that the how awful the plant agriculture is along with the animal agriculture. It's both really, really bad. And there absolutely could be different ways of doing it. But,
I disagree that we're not doing anything right. I think the regenerative rotational grazing of ruminants. Please let me
speak. Sounds like running a generator to put carbon in the ground.
Let him finish. Jeffrey, let him finish his point.
I think the regenerative ruminant grazing operations, they are growing. You've got these carbon credit programs that are getting rolling very good. It's giving farmers like me an incentive to do that carbon sequestration, get that carbon back into the soil. And we're able, just like Joel Salatin, just like Greg Judy, just like Gabe Brown, we're able to stockpile natural forage for the winter time so that we don't have to feed grains and rely on crops at all. So that crop agriculture, all those pesticides, all that petroleum reliance goes out the door. We don't need it. And so we're doing something right. There is no equivalent to that in the crop agriculture world. There is no equivalent to that.
And then let them respond, Garland. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I haven't seen any studies that say any of this regenerative stuff actually works long term. How long have you been doing it?
I've only been doing it for 5.5 years now.
Yeah, so that doesn't really, and how much acreage do you have?
That's not relevant.
Sure it is.
We're not going to get into personal information. Do you want to know? You want my tax returns?
Yeah. No. Well, how much acreage you have?
Why don't we talk about the principles of rotational grazing? How much money did you make last year, Jeffrey? It's none of my business, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask personal
comparison, bro.
All right. All right. We'll leave this be. Machine Lies, thank you very much for the call in. Appreciate it very much. Have a wonderful night. Rob Knorr, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead with your question.
Thanks.
Who it's to.
So I have two questions. I'll be very brief, but one to each side. My first question's for Jeffrey and Allie. I was wondering, I understand there's a dispute on the facts of sort of how much pollution and everything's going with vegan farming versus animal farming. But my question to you is, if Garland Farms could convince you that he was actually correct, that actually it's more damaging to our environment and even to animals to have sort of an increased vegan farming or an elimination of animal farming, would you then consider it to be more ethical to eat meat?
No, I would tell you that personally, how I would perhaps go out of my way to source my plant foods from, not from that source, as do meat eaters, right? Like we were saying before, we both agree that the mass food production industries, both animal and plant, are harmful, right? So I would, that's how I would personally change.
I'm not sure you realized what you just said. But go ahead, Rob. I'm sorry. Go.
Yeah, I mean, even if, like, let's say that was a possibility for you, you would then have to admit, when it came to the greater population at large, the billions of people that live in this world that would rely on getting protein from things like animal farming, if it is more ethical and actually better for the environment overall, clearly you would say the moral thing would be to increase that animal farming because we need to feed this population in the most ethical way possible, correct?
I wouldn't be, but there's still other factors here that, like I said, like the sheer
still
animal
opening to
death
change,
count,
you know,
the
it
sheer
can still
animal death
change.
count involved, in the industries. There's still other things that, no, I wouldn't.
Can I say something?
It would be so unrealistic for him to convince us that nothing would. I mean, it doesn't.
That's
numbers
often the
won't
case
show
with
it.
lefties.
But I mean,
I won't believe it even if it's true.
I like the honesty, right?
Yeah.
I like the honesty.
Are we lefties? Did you just?
I don't
call us
know. I would
lefties?
guess most.
No,
vegans-
most definitely not.
Oh,
Well,
I-
good.
No,
That's
if I found the numbers were closer, I would definitely do a lot more activism work as far as getting the numbers changed, and working within the system with the farms to get those numbers changed. But I don't think it's super unrealistic.
I'll just say this, and you can take this from, I'll admit that I'm biased, but I will say this, as trying to be as objective as possible, I think that Garland made some very compelling arguments. So I think that it would be incumbent on you, if you really are interested in this ethical position, to have a good faith effort to look at the information he sent you, because as an observer, I found it compelling.
We said well, he sent all of his information today, several hours ago, so we didn't have a lot of sent, but we spent a lot. We did clearly a lot. We did equal amount of research.
Jeffrey, I sent you information yesterday, and you told me to cut it down. You said to reduce the
You
information.
sent me 45
you wanted-
citations.
Yeah, you wanted to limit. You wanted
The
to
day
limit
before
what I
it,
could talk
you know.
about. Winning on a technicality is not winning.
You were sending new ones an hour before the show, so
Rob-
Either way,
Nonetheless,
Nothing we can do about that now.
we've looked at everything he's sent. We've looked at everything he's sent, and it's a bunch of stuff. And there's some stuff
Crucible.
that's good, and there's some stuff that's really bad and outdated.
Mr. Crucible, can I say something to Rob?
Yes, you can, Mr. Farms.
I wanted to point this out. You'll always see and hear vegans giving you exact numbers on the number of animals that we kill for food, because those animals are important enough to us that we actually count them. When it comes to the crop agriculture, the harmful, destructive, petroleum-reliant, destructive tillage agriculture, the same agriculture that the vegan menu relies upon, and you ask them how many animals are killed by not just the harvesting process, not just the plowing, but all the pesticides, all the fertilizers, the mining of the phosphorus, the mining of the potassium, the synthetic production and petroleum production of synthetic nitrogen, the secondary poisonings, the anticoagulant rodenticides that take 2 weeks to bleed out internally, small mammals that get too close to the crops. Ask them, what are those numbers? And they will tell you they don't know. In fact, they will tell you they don't care. They'll mock it. They'll go, crop deaths, though, like that. And if they don't do that, they'll try to blame all of that. They'll say, well, yeah, it's bad, but it's because of the livestock. Well, see, Jeffrey, for instance, is a competitive bicyclist, as I understand it.
Allie is.
Now, what?
Allie is.
Okay, Allie is
behind her.
So whenever you race in a bicycle, on a bicycle race, you get a time, right? Your time is measured. And so if Allie, if she gets a certain time on her race, and then she claims that she beat this other competitor, and you say, well, okay, where's your proof? What was the other competitor's time? And she says, I don't know, but look at my time. You see my time? That means I won. That's the same thing they're doing with animal agriculture versus plant agriculture, is that they can give you an exact number, because those of us in the meat business or the livestock business, we're actually counting the animals that we're killing.
So actually, I wanted, we never got to this. I wanted
I'm
to ask.
almost finished.
Okay.
The vegans are not counting that. And, you know, look at the animal rights activists. They're always standing in front of trucks that are going into slaughterhouses. Have you ever seen a vegan standing in front of a tractor that's spraying pesticides on oranges?
A lot of generalizations here, buddy.
If I can't,
Like almost nothing but generalizations. But let Allie talk.
Just real quick, because I wanted to get to this in the debate, we never got to it. So I wanted to ask you what you thought about that the 7.3 billion number, that study. What do you think it's more? It's more than, in your opinion?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Garland.
We sent you.
Yes, that didn't include that. That was they trapped animal. What they did was they went in and trapped animals to find out if there had been a reduction of animals in the field after harvesting. That didn't account for any of the insects that were poisoned, the birds that were poisoned, not only by the air, but also by the poisoned insects that the birds ate. It didn't count any.
My understanding, it took into account, I guess I got a review about it's either herbicide or pesticide.
Birds being killed by eating
no,
lizards.
It was within that acreage. You've got a major amount of the animal deaths that happen outside the borders of the acreage of the pesticides.
They studied outside the borders. Like, did you look at that study at all?
I did.
It doesn't sound like you did.
No, I did.
Because that study referenced another study, as I believe it was a 2004 a study on Argentinian crop production, where they tested the populations of harvest, and they saw that the populations around the borders of the croplands increase of, I think it was a specific species of mice. Yeah, so it measured the displacement. Did you take a look at that?
Yes, but that's what I'm trying to tell you. Listen, there are entire species of animals that are being driven into extinction by these pesticides. We're not talking about just moles and voles and field mice. We're talking about multiple species of songbirds that fly outside of that border area that you're talking about. We've got secondary poisonings like owls and bobcats and coyotes and bald eagles that will swoop in and eat a dead rat that's been poisoned by these anticoagulant pesticides that are used in the destructive crop agriculture. You've got all of this
article included secondary poisonings, though. You're saying that this article didn't include something that it did. It did include secondary poisonings.
No, you can't quantify that, Jeffrey. You can't quantify
the article,
that.
Garland.
Well,
just because you look on the periphery of a field and you say, okay, around this field, there were this many animals and this many dead bodies that we found. There are going to be dead bodies that aren't there anymore because they were picked up and eaten. If a cougar comes in and finds a dead rat on the periphery of an orange orchard and eats that rat and then walks back to its cave and dies in its cave, it's not going to end up in your study. And the other thing is all of these agrochemicals.
When they test it the next day and they don't find as many animals, they know some have passed away. That's what, like, you got to read the study, dude.
No, you're not talking about you're not talking about all you're not getting a full spectrum.
So that we don't belabor the point. I think we got the point from both sides. Rob, did you have another question? You said you had one for both sides.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Garland, I just wondered if you could talk real quick. I live in rural Pennsylvania in an area where family farms have dwindled by 80% in the past 40 years. You mentioned that a lot of the studies that they were doing were from these big corporations, places like Monsanto. I was wondering if you could just briefly tell the audience stories I've heard from family farms around here about the power that Monsanto has in our government. I've actually known family farms that have been investigated at the behest of Monsanto to make sure that they are quantifying every single pesticide they have, every single seed that they have, to make sure they're not trying to replant the genetically modified Terminator seeds that Monsanto has created, and how powerful the corporation is in diminishing the lives of family farms and helping to increase factory farms.
Absolutely. Most of the vegans that I've talked with are completely against eating organic vegetables and fruits and grains. because of the inherent reliance of organic farms, what that they have on the livestock industry. You've got to bring in that manure from the cows. They don't want anything to do with that. So they would rather rely upon petroleum-derived nitrogen, mined phosphorus, and mined potassium. And so the kind of farm, the Monsanto farm that you described, is the typical type of agriculture relied upon by those in the vegan movement. And so they are supporting that Monsanto model. And but directly to your point is, yes, it's so bad, Rob, that you have things like pesticide drift. You've heard where they spray pesticides on an apple orchard, and it drifts over and it kills another farmer's crops. And in most cases, the farmer that was harmed doesn't have, the courts won't support a lawsuit against the guy who poisoned his crops. But in a similar fashion, you have wind blowing seeds. So if you're an organic soybean farmer, for instance, surrounded by Monsanto soybean farmers, God help you, because the wind is going to blow one of those seeds over the fence, and those Monsanto agents will jump the fence, and they'll go and grab a bunch of soybeans and go back to the lab, hoping like hell that they're going to test positive for Monsanto GMO, genetically modified.
Is that
test positive?
Is that true? Is that true?
Yes.
That happens?
Yes. Yes.
Holy shit.
There's been many cases. And so what they'll do is Monsanto will turn around and sue the little farmer and drive him into bankruptcy so that he has to sell the farm. And then the destructive Monsanto soybean fields around him will absorb what was once the only organic farm in the neighborhood.
Well, that's pretty eye-opening. Rob Noor, thank you very much for the call-in. Have yourself a wonderful evening. Appreciate it very much. We'll move off from the call-in section. We'll move over to the super chats. I did have one question kind of for each side. The first question that I had was on the Jeffrey and Allie side. One of the points that Rob Noor, who was just in, kind of brought up was the ethical consideration. And it sounds like even if you were convinced that on your kind of side of the aisle in this debate, that if you could be convinced that he's doing everything possible to actually create a reduction in environmental impacts and was able to demonstrate that the ethical considerations would still kind of keep you in the vegan side, meaning you would still not consume animal products, this type of thing, even if your environmental impact was larger?
I'm not really sure. I'd have to really think about it. Like coming to that kind of a decision on the fly is kind of a tough decision to make, but
no, I understand.
It would have to be some pretty convincing stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm
well,
not seeing any
he's
of
just
that yet.
saying was I think the point of the hypotheticals, to say if you could be convinced of the environmental impact,
I could be convinced of anything. How about that?
Yeah, but if you were convinced the environmental impact was far worse if we all went vegan, would you then have a moral obligation to eat meat?
No, because I don't trust the conditions on that on what on that assessment would be of a vegan world not being possible. I think, like I said, Garland and us, and I agree on that the current models projected for, for what, like the idea of plant permaculture, like I said, I have cross planting. There's a possibility for a vegan world that is causing as little harm as possible. And so, no, I would have problems with that. And then I had a question. So when you asked, like, would we begin purchasing from like meat from regenerative farms, like only, like, is that what you're saying when you
no,
ask?
The hypotheticals looking for necessary entailment. So it's saying if it could be demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt that for sure 100% you knew for a fact that the vegan diet caused a much worse environmental impact than a carnivorous diet, do you feel that you would be morally obligated then to eat meat because of this impact of the environment? So that's what it's looking to solve. And so I'm going to kind of actually ask Garland the same exact question. Garland, if it was demonstrated to you 100% without any doubt whatsoever that the vegan diet caused the least amount of environmental impact, would you say that you would have to significantly change your farming practices, and would you then stop consuming animal products?
I would have to ask you to broaden your question to include, does that mean that I could also hypothetically get an optimal nutrition from plants? Because
nope, this is just environmental. That's it. This is just an environmental question. So just saying, if the impact of the environment was such that you found out that the consumption of animal products caused a much greater environmental impact than a vegetarian-based, plant-based diet or did for environment, would you then feel obligated to shrug off animal-based foods? Not speaking to the diet at all. And that might be a reason why you wouldn't. I have no idea. That's the curiosity of the question.
I know that a 100% plant-based diet is deficient in certain nutrition. So I would not sacrifice my health and the health of my family and people that I love for the environment. However, if you change that hypothetical question to if there was some way to get those nutrients that aren't provided by a plant-based diet, and the plant-based diet turned out to cause the least amount of harm, then yes, I would. As long as those vitamins were coming from plants that I could access rather than being sent to me in a plastic bottle from some corporation that I would have to indefinitely trust.
Damn. I think that's a pretty comprehensive answer, to be completely honest with you. Let me move into the super chats, guys. Appreciate you being here, sticking around for all this. The audience obviously likes to engage with people who come on and debate. So kind of starting back, going over to the dono chat first. The first one comes in from from Sterling Fuentes. He sends in nothing, just a $10 super chat, no message. My favorite kind of super chat. Well, Emmanuel says, I may not be able to stay and listen, but here's my support for Team Meat for $5. $20 comes in from Joseph Newton, and he says, you need a steak emoji. $10.99 comes in from Rabid Carnivore, and he says, towards the chuck roast. $130 comes in from Redfish Bear, sends no message at all, just showing support for the show. Appreciate that very much. $10 from Joseph Newton. I can see it now. Garland's out there in the dark at 5 a.m. He's feeding his cows, and he's muttering under his breath, those fucking vegans, mutter, 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 try to tell me how to feed my cows, mutter, 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 and also, Andrew, get a steak emoji. So this is what Joseph Newton says. By the way, having known many farmers in the Michigan Rust Belt, I can tell you that that's exactly what they do in the morning, and who can blame them? $20 comes in from Brandy. No message entered, just showing show support. Appreciate that very much, Brandy. $20 from Beck. He says, massive respect to Garland. I'd really like to see him debate again. Yeah, I thought it was very informative, to say the least. Moving over to the YouTube chats. Hang on a second, guys, while I pull these up. The mutter, these damn vegan. Pretty good, I must admit. Do you guys do that? Does the vegan side do that? Do they like get up in the morning and like get a cup of coffee and it's like, damn meat eating bastards, you're ruining the world? Is there ever any of that from your side? No, none of that. So.
I guess it depends on the day.
She says maybe a little. Right. All right, guys, we're going to get into the rest of these super chats. Sorry, I had to pull them up here. We use two different super chat systems because a lot of people here don't like to support the, YouTube being one of those evil corporations we talk about so much. We had a bunch of gifted memberships come in, 10 gifted memberships come in from, let's see if I can find who sent in the gifted memberships. I made sure to thank them in the chat, but I appreciate those gifted memberships very much. A lot of people like throwing things at debaters, and you can only do that for the channel. Georgie of Porgy sends in a $5 super chat and says T-bone steaks can also double as a great shanking tool. And I'm sure he saw that in a movie somewhere. All right. Circle G Design sent in a $5 super chat and said, beautiful tan, healthy skin versus sickly ghost people. I think so. Okay, to be fair, chat, I really do think it's just the light where they're at.
Yeah, it's camera
and
lighting.
with you. So Garland has yellow light on him, and then they have kind of a darker light on him. But I mean, just to be totally fair with that, they're already mad at me. They're like, "No, call them sick vampires. What are you doing?" But anyway, your son sends in a $20 super chat and says, "Garland Farms is very based. Cringe joke incoming. Why are vegan jokes terrible? Because they are soy cheesy."
That's a good one.
Got out of the vegan cult 3 years ago.
I don't even know if I've heard a vegan joke.
Yeah, well,
Like
he had
an
one
actual
more.
vegan joke with a punchline. That's pretty good.
One more in it. He says, "So
cool.
I'm so glad I got out of the vegan cult 3 years ago. It was a huge mistake to be vegan that whole time." Little play on words there.
Oh boy.
Yeah, terrible jokes, but still kind of funny. Lisa B sends in $10, says absolutely nothing, just showing channel support. Appreciate that very much. Reverend Coffin's other son sent in another $10 and says, I just wanted to send in another 10 to say Garland Farms is very based, and blessings to him. It was Very Moss, by the way, who gifted those 10 Crucible memberships. Appreciate that very much. Bunch of membership renewals tonight. And Made by Jim Bob sends in a $20 super chat, and he says, Rachel, use this to make Andrew a nice steak. Not trying to beat up on the vegans on this one, but I like me a really good steak. I'm not going to lie. Jacob S sent in a $5 super chat and says, regeneratively managed livestock will increase carbon sequestration and nutrient cycling biodiversity. This improves the earth. What say you, Allie? And I'll actually put this in the chat and pull it up. Sometimes it's easier for people to actually read them. So let me do that for you real quick. Yeah, let me pull it up.
Andrew, can I get a drink of water real quick?
By all means, go ahead.
Okay.
So Jacob, here's the super chat for you, Allie.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, this kind of touched on what I was talking about before about me personally as a vegan, not being against animals being used. I mean, I'm not against bees being used to pollinate plants. And I think there may be a place for animals being used to regenerate lands, perhaps. I would have to do a little bit more research on it. But again, I don't think I think it's a slippery slope once we start incorporating those livestock into the human food system.
Yeah. What about the idea, Allie, that many vegans use as a moral argument that we're enslaving animals? If you were to use animals in this particular way that you're talking about, would that be animal enslavement?
Perhaps. I mean, I've heard this argument as like with pets as well. I mean, it's like,
yeah, I've heard it with pets too.
You know, yeah. So it's kind of hard. I think I don't think it's black and white. I think there's a definite gray area. I don't deny, humans, we possess higher mental capabilities and intelligence than animals, as we would, control our kids and little babies from walking into, we control them. Are they our slaves, or our children our slaves? It's kind of, it's a gray area.
Gotcha. Okay. Jacob S also sent in another $5 super chat, and he says, regenerative, and I'll post this down as well because it's kind of a longer one again. But here's what he says to you guys. Let me just yank that up for you. He says, AG is a net positive. It's a photon mining system, sticking carbon together and keeping it sequestered in the soil. Industrial agriculture really destroys.
Again, I
think
just
you're
don't know if
muted.
there's a lot of
Oh, no,
models
you're
of
good.
it.
Sorry.
to be making these kinds of claims when there hasn't been much studies about it and it hasn't been done that much. I mean, it's definitely, it gets talked about because it's very popular, because it's, you know, it's a like carnivore diet argument. But I again, there's no, you know, show me 25 years, you know, like even if it works, like, is it really this like does it really have this smaller carbon footprint? I don't agree, because I don't think that most of the time that these animals will be getting all of their food and water, and I think they will have to get water and food taken to them at some times, and there will be diesel being burned, you know, and it's not as perfect. Like, sure, it could be perfect on someone's small farm, but the overwhelming majority of farms aren't going to be able to pull that kind of thing, especially at the numbers to feed so many people. And especially you guys are all telling all the vegans to eat meat, so then we'd be having to you know, come up with more meat and use more land for more vegan, you know, for the vegan population going back to eating meat, and vegetarians and stuff like that. So it's just, I don't see it as being,
but I mean, come on, there's like 25 of you, right? Like, there's like 30 of you, right?
We are the minority, you know.
We're all screaming online.
That's why the chat's obviously against us, because we are in the minority.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Garland. Sorry.
I heard Jeffrey mention that he wouldn't support regenerative livestock agriculture unless we show him studies over 25 years. The truth is that the studies have been done, and this is exactly why we've got these carbon credit systems that are being implemented, allowing regenerative farmers, livestock farmers, to actually make money by sequestering atmospheric carbon back into the soil. But talking about waiting 25 years,
that you're saying, these carbon credits,
these are private corporations that are offering these, private corporations. So you mentioned we have to wait 25 years. We've already got the science. We already know it works. We don't have 25 years. All the sources that have researched it tell us that we have 60 years at the most of topsoil left because of the destructive nature of crop agriculture. It causes erosion, both wind and rain. And so if we continue relying so much on the mainstream crop agriculture and we don't transition a lot of that corn and soybean into regenerative livestock rotational grazing systems, then we could run out of topsoil in the next 60 years. So farting around for 25 years is not a luxury that we really have.
Okay. Marshall asks, for $5, does JD Garland have a YouTube channel, and is he hiring?
My YouTube channel is Garland Farms. It's the only Garland Farms channel on YouTube. And right now I am not hiring, but get in touch with me and we'll see what happens in the future.
JD's channel is Garland Farms, says Lisa V. A great channel, gives it 100 out of 100 out of 100 with a cool emoji on top of it. So apparently you've got some fans out there, Garland. For $20, nobody wanted you guys to forget that Garland Farms content is great. Glad to see him on the Crucible. And of course, he's welcome back whenever. Actually, both sides are welcome back whenever. I have no issues with anybody here. I enjoyed it very much. Enjoyed the entirety of the debate. Before you guys go, take a second, even though the super chats kind of shouted you out anyway. But go ahead, take a second, Garland. Shout your channel out. Tell everybody where they can find it one more time.
Yeah, go to Garland Farms. I've got about 160 or maybe 260. I don't remember. There's a lot of videos illustrating the destructive nature of the crop agriculture that the vegan menu relies upon. From pesticides to the mining of phosphorus, the mining of potassium, issues that the vegans will not ever address because it puts crop agriculture in such a bad light. Lots of videos showing the crop deaths. Outside of my channel, Garland Farms, if you ever want to see one of the things that vegans won't talk about regarding crop deaths, go to your search bar, your YouTube search bar, and put 3 words in there: crop protection shooting. And you'll see hundreds and hundreds of videos showing hunters out there who work for farmers shooting animals in the face for getting too close to the crops that produce the vegan menu.
I've actually done that myself for friends who needed that done from pesky critters going into cornfields, especially. Jeffrey, Allie, go ahead, shout your channel out to everybody where they can find you.
YouTube.com at Jeffrey Phillips. I have lots of vegan discussions and debates with carnivore, ketos, and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, real quick, there was 2 last ones that came in real quickly. Pod Dweller Tom Coombe for $4 says, to the vegan duo, do you think there's too many people? Should we eat the bugs forever? What's your plan?
Bugs aren't vegan
Yeah,
for
it's not
one,
vegan.
so I don't know why that would be a question that someone would ask.
Well, you know, like you guys have all seen like the soy jack memes, you know what I mean? It's like, we're gonna eat the bugs and stay in the coom pod. That's the joke, right? That's
the bugs.
Yeah, eat the bugs. $9.11 comes in from Bayes Lit Analyzer, and he just says, shout out to BPF and Base Mom. Appreciate that very much. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for coming on this fine evening. I hope you guys all had a wonderful time. And from all of us here at the Crucible to all of you out in Crucible land, have a wonderful night.